Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone is doing amazingly well. Today we are going to be continuing with our introduction to 3ds Max. This will be lesson 6. If you missed the first few lessons, feel free to check them out in the playlist. This lesson is going to be all about the material editor and material creation using Corona Renderer. And lastly, if you do find this content useful, please subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into it. Okay, so here we are inside of 3ds Max. I have a simple scene set up with a basic black and white HDRI and a simple Corona camera. So let's get into it. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to press M to bring up our material editor. And here we have our material editor. So the first thing we need to know is that there are two ways to prepare materials inside of 3ds Max. We can use the compact material editor. This is the one that we see in front of us at the moment. Or we can use the slate material editor, which is a node-based material editor where you drag your materials from the left-hand side into this part over here. And then you just link maps from the side. So for instance, you have a bip, we'll just take a cellular map over here, and you would link maps into these nodes over here to create whatever material you need to create. Both methods have exactly the same final result, so there is no specific method that you should be using to get a better result, because they both create exactly the same result. So today we won't be using this method. We'll be using the compact material editor because I think it's easier to explain and I just prefer it myself. So we'll delete this one and we'll go back to compact material editor, and here we are. So in this one, to create things, we just click on the little blocks on the side here. So if we needed to add a map into this, we would just click on that and we would find it here. So that is the difference between the two methods of creating materials in the compact and slate material editor. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is the sidebar over here. So there's just a few simple things that you need to know over here. You don't need to know all of them because 99% of the time you do not use most of these things. But a few good things to know is over here you can change your display type. So instead of having a sphere, you could have a cylinder like you see over here. Or you could have a box like you see over here. But most of the time you'll be working in a sphere, and throughout my career I've noticed that I very rarely change that, because most of the time you're testing your materials inside of your scene and not inside of this box. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing that you'll notice is over here we have this checkered ball, and that is, if we open this, this creates a checkered pattern in the background. So you can see how the reflection is reacting to the environment. So that's quite an interesting to have. Usually I do use that. I find it quite useful. Okay, moving on. Over here you don't really need to know many of those. One thing that I would say is useful is select by material. So for example, if we create a few different things over here and we apply, for example, this material to these three things. To apply or assign a material to something, we use this assign material to selection and we click OK. We just need to rename that. Click OK. So then we will deselect it, and when you have this material selected and you come to this select by material, it will select everything in the scene that has this material applied to it. So for example, in a architectural scene, if you have your building that has a lot of windows and it has a glass selected to it, and you just want to select those windows and the glass, you come down to wherever you created your glass material and you would select by material. And the same for any other materials. Say for instance you want to just select the concrete bits or the bits that have plaster. It's very useful. Okay, so we will delete that for the moment. And we'll come down to here. This is where we find materials to add. So if I select that, and this is where we would find our, for example, Corona material. So that's over here. And you can also select the same thing by clicking over here, so Corona material. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select this material and we're going to click over here and we're going to say Corona physical material. We're going to click OK, and now we have our first blank Corona material set up over here. Okay, so inside of this Corona material you will find all these different settings, and I'll do my best to explain them to you in the best way and the most easiest way possible. So the first thing at the top here, you'll see that in the new versions of Corona we have all these presets. Usually we didn't have presets and we had to adjust all of these settings manually. Now what they've done is that they've created basic presets. These are not finished materials. These are just presets that give you a base to work from. So they'll give you a few rough settings, and then from there you can continue to refine your material and get to the result that you want to get. So if, for example, we come to here and we select a chrome, for example, that will give us our basic chrome. Over here we come to apply, and that would give us our basic chrome. But there's no bump, so there's no roughness to it. There's no maps added into these slots. So it's essentially just like a basic preset. This shouldn't be confused with the Corona material library, whereas these materials on the left hand side here are finished materials. And if we just wait for it to open, these materials, if you have a look at, for example, metals, and we copy this into our, to copy these materials into your material editor, you just click and drag. And if we click on that, you can see that there's already maps applied to these materials. So these are considered as finished materials, whereas the presets, again, are just starting points for materials. Okay, so we are going to apply our basic gray material back onto here, and we are going to continue. The next setting that we have is the Metalness setting. So when creating a Corona material, you'll have two workflows that you can start from. You can start from a metal workflow. So you would select this if you're going to use anything that's a dielectric that is essentially a metal, so that conducts electricity and that sort of thing. And you would use non-metal for things like wood, concrete, stone, glass, all of those types of things. So essentially everything else except for metals. Okay, so for starters, I think we can create our first material, and we'll start with a non-metal. And we'll move across actually to our shell material. And this, for example, if you select this, you'll notice at the bottom that the translucency is activated, because this is used for things like leaves, for example. And if you hover over it, it will give you a quick explanation. So this you would check for things that have transparency and let light through them. I have a quick example that I can show you guys just over here. And these are the types of things that you would use that setting for. So this is quite a good web page that I found, and I'll leave a link below in the description where you guys can have a look, and there's some interesting things over here that you can read about the corona materials. But this is a good example of what you would use that setting for, because when this is not ticked, this is not available. So that's just something you guys need to know. So the next thing over here, we have the level. So that's essentially the lightness or the darkness of the material. For 99% of the time, you don't need to change this because you can adjust the lightness and the darkness of the material through your actual color. But if we change this to say 0.2, you can see that everything gets darker. 0.7 for example, and everything starts to get lighter. And it's the same thing with your color. So for example, if you wanted to have a darker color, there's no need to adjust this setting. You can just come and adjust it in here, and you can adjust your colors via this. So there's no need to change that. I would just leave that at 1 forever, unless you have a specific reason to change that. Okay, the next thing what we'll learn is that next to color we can add a map. So for example, if we wanted to add or create a wood map for this, we could just click on the side here, and this is where we'll add a bitmap, and we'll click OK. And I'll just have a look if I have a quick one here. Go to maps, and we'll go to wood. So we can scroll down to any particular map that you have on your computer, and I will choose, just for example, this one, and we'll click OK. If you want to preview your map before you open it to see if it's a high resolution or maybe it's too small, you can just click on the left hand side view over here, and it will show you your size, and it will show you this is 1:1. So this is the actual size of the map. So if you're happy with that, you can click OK. And now it's brought the map into the scene. I'm just going to apply a white material on the background. So we'll go to physical material, click OK. We have it here, and I'm just going to apply it to the background so we can just look at our things better. Okay, and for example, if we create a box, I will just show you one other thing over here, and just close that, and we'll click OK, and that will apply it to this box over here. And usually when you're applying materials to walls and things, you want them to be a specific size. So what you can do is you can use a UVW map, and you can apply that to your box. So when you have your box selected, you apply UVW map. Usually we use a box because it is a box. and over here you can, if you just have a look in the left-hand viewport over here, you can see that the map size is being adjusted, and you can adjust all the sides separately. Okay, there we go. And you can choose on which axis you would like to work also. So you saw that the top wasn't changing, but now the top is also changing. Okay, and there's a few different mapping settings here for different types of objects that you can see over here. For example, if you're working on a cylinder, you can select cylinder. If you're working on a ball or a sphere, you can use spherical, and that type of thing. Okay, so that is the basics of that. So we are going to go one more thing before we just go back. I will just show you that over here you can set your tiling. So if you wanted to double your map, you'd say 2 or 2, and it will make the map tiled by 2 times. Or if you go 10 and 10, you'll see that the map's been tiled 10 times. Okay, so we're going to set it just back to 1. So it's our standard. And we can come to the left hand side and we can say fit, and it's going to fit exactly the way, and it's going to fit to the exact size of the box. Okay, so we're going to move back to our material editor and we are going to continue with the settings over here. So our next setting will be the roughness, and the roughness essentially is what it says. It shows whether your material is smooth or it's rough. So if your material is smooth, for example, it's going to be more reflective. So if you polish something, it's going to become more reflective. Whereas a value of 1, the material is going to be matte. Okay, so this is also linked with the IOR value, and that stands for index of refraction. And index of refraction is how reflective the object is. Each material in the world has its own index of refraction, and the lucky thing for you is that basically in the latest version of Corona, when you set up, for example, your apply a preset, it's going to find this automatically for you. Whereas before, we would have to go to certain sites and we would have to look up that number if we wanted to create a material that was physically correct. So for example, if you come to Pixel and Poly over here, they have a whole list of all the different types of materials you could imagine, arranged alphabetically, and you can see that they all have slightly different IOR values. So that is that. Okay, so IOR, higher IOR, higher IOR values will give you more reflective, more reflectivity, and lower values will give you more matte results. So a base setting is around 1.4, 1.5. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to have a look at is bump. So bump is essentially like something similar to displacement, so it just adds texture to your material. So for example, if we click on the right over here, we can click on, let's say we can add a noise map in there. So the way a bump map works is whatever is white is going to be raised up and whatever is black is going to go down. So over here we have this, and you're starting to see distortion on top of this sphere. So if we go inside over here and we set the tiling to say 50, and we set the tiling over here to 50 also, we should start to see it on our model. So this is what bump creates. So you can use that on many different materials like concrete. Essentially all materials are going to have a certain amount of bump. Some are going to have more, some are going to have less. And that is affected by white and black. If we use the gray map, that would the bump would not be so strong. So we could use a different map, for example. So I will clear this one and I'm going to look for a different one. So we're going to go into our library over here and we will go to say noises, and we will use a dirt map. So for example, this one. So over here, as you see, these white parts are the parts that are going to go up and the darker parts are going to go down. So we're going to click open. And now you can see over here the effect that creates. So it or gives the material a better texture. Okay, so that is looking pretty cool, interesting, like a slightly corroded wood, for example. And we are going to go down to a setting that's also quite important, and that's this blur setting over here. I've noticed that a lot of people don't actually know what that does. But this blur setting, if we make this box, for example, really long, we're in the wrong thing. For example, here, if we make this box really long, that goes into the that will go into the distance. What you'll notice when you start working in more and more scenes, that if your camera is at a slightly lower angle, the map starts to get blurred the further you go away. And the more acute the angle is, the more blur you're going to see on the ground, for example. Whereas if you set this to, for example, 0.3, the viewing angle is not going to get blurred so much. So this texture's integrity at an acute angle is going to be better when this is at a lower value than when it is at 1. Hopefully that makes sense. But you can test that out on acute angles, and you'll see that if you're getting blur on your material, you just need to reduce this to a lower level. Okay, so we can delete our box, come back to our sphere, and now that we have this bump on top of this material, I think it's a good time to go down to this clear coat layer. And this clear coat layer is like a varnish, for example. So if we add it on top, it will fill in all of these gaps that we have over there. So if we set this to 1, this, you can see now we don't have that same noise that we had on top there, because there's like a layer of varnish that you have added on top of the material. I think inside of this this website over here, there's also a nice example of how that works. Over here is it here? Yeah, so over here you have this vase that's got these indentations in it, but when you add a clear coat to it, pay attention to the reflection. When you add a clear coat to it, it essentially smooths the object out. So now you're getting a nice sharp reflection, and over here we're getting this distorted reflection because the geometry is actually not flat. So the clear coat layer is like a layer of varnish. It's the same over here. Okay, so we'll just set that back to, and you can set the IOR, so the index of refraction for that, and the roughness exactly the same as you set it up there. So for the moment, we'll just switch that one off. Okay, and we are going to go to translucency was the next one. So we learned about that because that was the thin shell material that we used there for leaves. So that would be that. The next thing we're going to learn is refraction, and refraction is things that let light through it. So essentially like glass and water. So if we select this and we select our basic gray material, and now we come to refraction and we set this to 1, it's going to create a totally transparent material. I'm just going to copy that over because I just want to check if my background is there. So I'm going to select that. Oops. Okay, we just have to wait for our computer. Okay, so this one, physical material. Okay. And I just want to make sure my background is a white material. Yeah. Okay. So this is where you choose how transparent your object is going to be. So if it's going to be a glass or a water, this is where you'd be setting that. Sometimes you can raise this up a little bit if you want to add a color to it, for example. And yeah, next to that is caustics. So I have another tutorial. If you have a look into this playlist, there's a tutorial on how to create a water material, and this is the caustics that come. So those are those light effects at the bottom of the pool. So this is what you would use for that. And dispersion is what you have, for example, if you put a crystal on a table or a diamond on a table and you shine a light through it, that will cause these light spectrum to come out. So you'll have almost like a rainbow effect coming through. So if we go to, where is that? Diamond light dispersion, and if you have a look, this is the effect that you would get with that setting. Okay, all right. So if we, for example, select our sphere and we set a basic glass, we'll go for tinted glass for the moment. That is basic material. I did it on the wrong one again, sorry. Just go back and we're going to do it on this one. So we'll do it as a preset and we will select glass tinted over here. Yes, click OK. So you can see that over here in the settings, if we come down to refraction, over here we have 1. So if we drop that to 0.5 or fraction to 0, so that's going to be a solid object, and 1 is going to be a transparent object. So now you ask, but it doesn't look very transparent. Why is that? Well, if we come down to media options, over here we have volumetric scattering. And this controls the density of the color in the glass. So that is controlled by this setting over here. And if we set that to 50, now you'll notice that the glass is letting more light through it. So the color intensity is lower. So if you have a look at these like fins on the edge here, this glass is almost completely transparent over there. But in places like here where the glass is more dense, and if you look at this area over here, the light doesn't go or seep into that glass as much, so it gets darker. So this is where you can change the color of certain types of glass. If you want to say, for instance, create a beer or a whiskey type material, this is how you would do it. Okay, so we've gone through those ones. Now we're going to have a look at displacement. So for example, displacement is exactly the same thing as bump, but instead of using a map, it actually displaces the geometry on top of the on top of your model, for example. So to use displacement, you need to actually apply a corona displacement modifier on top of your object. So what you do is you would come to modifiers list, and you would come and look down to corona displacement modifier, and you would copy a map inside of that. So just for example, we could click over here. It's going to bring up this, and we can try to add a noise in there. Okay, and we are going to just copy this noise into a block over here so we can see what it's doing. Instance, always instance. So when you instance things, whatever you do here is going to update over there. So we're going to just say this to 10, and you can see that this has changed already. And that has changed already because it's been moved up 10 centimeters. So I can see that this noise is huge. So if we reduce it to like 5, for example, this is going to give us this type of displacement. So it's starting to look like a very jelly-like Coca-Cola jelly type thing. But it's an interesting thing to use. And the one thing that you do need to note is that it does come at a cost of render time. So bump maps, they render very quickly, whereas displacement is going to render a lot slower than a bump map. So I'll just pause the video and wait a little while so you can see the finished result. I'll just make it a slight bit bigger. So let's go to 4 and we'll just wait to see the result. Okay, so here we have the actual result rendered, and as you can see that the displacement map has actually changed the geometry of the object. Okay, so for that we have done everything, so we can delete that and go back to our smooth model, and we are going to have a look at what else we have to learn about the materials. Okay. So the next thing we are going to do is we are just going to reset the material one more time. So back to Corona physical material, and we are back to normal, and we are going to have a look what else we have over here. So clear coat is the layer of varnish on top of the material, and then we come down to the final one, which is the sheen layer. So the sheen layer is not like varnish, but it's usually used for something like fabric, for example. In the past we used to use fall off maps for this, but now this gives you a nice white fall off. So if we come back to these examples that I found over here, and we move down to Sheen. Before, when you applied a material map onto something, you would have this kind of result that we see in the bottom image. There would be no fall off on the actual material. So like I said before, we used to use a gradient map to get the fall off on this, but now in the actual material we have the sheen, and this creates these white fall offs that give that like furry, fuzzy feeling on top of the material. So we can have a look inside of our scene. So we come to one of these presets, and I think at the bottom there's a velvet one. And over here you'll be able to see this kind of white effect on top of that. So if we go up to 1, you're going to see this exaggerated. So it's this white kind of nice fall off that you can use on any type of fabrics that you are creating. And if we drop that to 0, that's going to remove it, and that's how your materials or fabrics would look without this setting. So as you can see, it's a really, really useful setting, and you guys are, like I said before, really lucky that these presets have come along, and I would encourage you to use them. There's no reason not to embrace their technology and be happy. You don't have to suffer like we did in the past, but it's still important to understand all of these settings so that when you are creating bespoke materials, you know how to change them and how to edit them, because you don't want a client coming to you and asking you for a specific material and you sitting there saying, oh, it's not in the preset, so I don't know how to use it. So it's important to know all of these things over here. Okay, so moving on, we continue to media options. So this is where we learned about the glass and the different colors for the glass and liquid type materials. At the bottom, this is what you would use for candles and skin, for example. This is something we don't really use very often in architectural visualization, but sometimes for personal projects you could test that out. Okay, and advanced options, I'll just have a look here. For the moment, I don't think as a beginner you need to look into here. I almost never go inside of this, so there's no real need to go in there. And then we get down to all of these maps over here. So what do? Well, those maps are just representations of these boxes next to all of these settings over here. So like we added a material into that. So let's say we just add, for example, a brick material, for example. So if we select this brick material and it goes onto there, we just go up. Now you'll see that there's a little M next to it and it is shown at the bottom over here. So whatever you add into these little slots over here, it will be added into one of these slots over here. And on top of that, you can control the blending amount of these materials as well. So for example, if you wanted this to not be so strong, and for some strange reason you wanted it to be a little bit purple, you could drop the opacity to 50 and some of that base color would be showing through. So that's good to know these opacity options over here. So this is pretty much it for the material editor over here. There's one more thing that I'd like to go over, and that is your options of choosing different Corona materials, because there are a lot of, this is just the start. So there is a whole nother hole that we can go down, and that is all of these types of Corona materials that are used for different uses. So each one of these materials over here could have its own video for itself, because some of them can get complex, but I'll just briefly go through the most commonly used ones so you can have a basic idea of what each one of them does. We won't go through like hair and skin, because those are not very commonly used in architectural visualization. And you don't really need to know them. You can use them for personal projects without a problem, but for the moment we are going to skip those ones. Okay, so next thing we can have, so we've had a look at Corona physical material. That's the one that we have here. Then we have the hair material. So I think it's pretty obvious what that one is used for. And then you get Corona layered material. That sounds pretty interesting. So what we can do is we can come down to this left slot over here, and we are going to create a Corona physical material. And say, for example, we're going to go to a preset of, let's say, a metal, so brass brushed. Okay, and we can apply that to our sphere. So we are going to rename this material to brass, and that's going to apply to that. And now when we go over here, what we can do is we can use it as a layered material. So we could create another material on top of this material. That sounds pretty interesting. Let's try that. Okay, so we are going to not discard our old material. We're going to keep it as a base, and then we're going to add our other material on top. So we're going to click OK. And now you'll see the base material is our brass. But now on top of that, we can create a different material. So let's create a Corona Physical, and we're going to paint on top of this material. So let's say there was like a green type of paint on top of this, something like this, and we wanted it to be a little bit shiny because it's an oil-based paint, so maybe 0.1. Okay, so now that brass has been painted, but it's an old kind of thing, so we want it to be scratched and we want to show some of that old brass coming through. So what we can do is we can go up one, back into our material, and we can use a mask to mask out some of this material and show the brass material coming through. So what we'll do is we're going to add a bitmap into there, and we are going to use a noise. So we're going to come over here and we are going to use something that's all scratched up and it looks old. So let's have a look at which one could work well. Well, we'll try this one to start off with. So we're going to click open. And now what you can see is basically this cool effect where you're getting one material on top of the other material. This is excellent for adding more interest to materials. And usually when paint is on top of something, there's going to be it's going to be a little bit higher. So what we can do is we can copy this mask layer, and we can go to our paint material, and we are going to paste it into our bump as a copy. Okay, and now you can see that this paint looks like it's actually sitting on top of the brass material, which is pretty awesome. So that is how you can use a layered material, and you can have multiple layers, so you could continue refining this, and you could even add like writing on top of it. There's so many different ways you could use this. It's really, really useful material. So that is the layered material. Okay, so we're going to just jump back to our default material, copy that down on top of that, and we are going to continue down the list. So that was the layered material. Corona Legacy material is just what they have named old Corona materials. So from the different versions of Corona, you'll see that when you open an old Corona scene, it will not be, your materials won't be named Corona Physical material, they will be named Corona Legacy material. So that is the old version of a Corona material, and these settings are a little bit different because they updated these settings in the Corona material. So we can continue to the next one. The next one is a Corona Light material, which is quite interesting because you can not only use Corona lights in your scene, but you can also use materials that are lights. So what we are going to do is we are going to take this and we are going to just call this light. Okay, and we are going to go to our HDRI, and I think we'll just leave it for the way it is at the moment. But so we're going to go to this light material and we're going to apply a Corona light material. So if we click OK, here we're going to have this material. We're going to set the intensity to something a little bit higher, like 3, and we are going to apply it to our sphere. There we go. So now you can use these materials as light emitters in your scene. So that is pretty awesome, and you can adjust the intensity of it and it acts as a light. So you can also control the intensity with a map, so exactly the same as bump. Light areas will be more intense, so if we set this to 1, a map that has white in it will represent an intensity of 1, and gray going down to black black would represent 0. So if you just added, say for example, this, okay, and so over here you can see that black is the light totally switched off and white is the light switched on. Okay, so we can undo that, and you can just play around with these settings. You can make it invisible, visible, but these are pretty intuitive, so you can see exactly what these do. I don't really need to tell you about that. Okay, so now we can continue down the list. And this is a corona ray switch material. So this material, what you can do with that is, for example, if you have in a scene something that is in a room, say you have a room and you have a wall that's totally painted blue, for example, and that blue is giving a color cast in the room and the whole room is starting to look blue. You can apply a corona ray switch material on top of that and make it emit the same color as all the other walls. So I'm gonna just apply a new material. Okay, let's copy this one over to here, and we're gonna call this one ray, and apply that to this over here, and I'm gonna make this a seriously strong red, for example, and we're gonna see the color cast. There isn't that much color cast over here, but if we add a box next to it, so if we just draw a box here, okay, there we go, and we apply this on top of that, you'll see that there is a color cast on what we could imagine this to be a wall. Okay, so what you could do is you could select this material, and on top of that material you could say corona ray switch material, click OK, keep old material as submap, yeah, and now what we are going to do is we are going to take this physical material and we're going to say that that one is the one that we want to see. So we're going to click copy and click OK. So we are seeing this, and now we can copy a different material like the one that all the other walls are into here, and we say copy, and now you see that the casting is, we'll just copy the same one into here, so, and that one will be also into there. So now the casting is essentially gone. I think we're actually seeing a little bit of it, but if we copy that into there, yeah, now you can see that you can totally eliminate color casts from materials. So that is also very useful, and it's a good thing to know. The next one we are going to have a look at is that one you don't need to use for the moment. This is something that you can animate different types of options of materials. So for example, if a client says, I want to see this sphere in 5 different material types, what you can do is you can apply a material select material on top of that, discard and click OK. You can have 5 different materials and you can have them all applied to this this object, and say for example this one is number 2, copy. You could just switch between them and you could animate that. So for example, you could go frame 2, add, we're not going to be learning animation today, but I'm just explaining to you what this material does. So you could go start your animation, go to layer 2, add this, it animates it, then you go to layer 3, continue with your animation, add another one, and then when you render it out, you render a segment and it you'll render 5 different or 4 or 5 different images, and you'll have 5 different variations of materials. Okay, everybody still with me? Good. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at what else we have. So the next one is a Corona shadow catcher material. So this one, I'm not going to show you what it does because it takes a little bit too long and this merits its own video. This is, for example, if you wanted to have a base plate inside of your viewport. So a base plate is just a background photo, and you had a car, for example. So you have a background photo with a road. So you just put the car on top of the base photo, and you would use this material, and then the shadows from the car would cast on top of the background photo. So it would integrate the car into the background photo with this material. Okay. Next, Corona skin material is obviously for humans and candles and stuff like that, because that uses subsurface scattering like candles and skin. And the next one is going to be the Corona slicer material, which is very useful. So for example, the Corona slicer material is what you can use for cutting through things and creating cutaways. So we're also not going to go through that one, but it's essentially just a tool that can create sections through stuff. So you just create a box, and well, we can do it. I'll just show you quickly. But yeah, okay. So what we can do is create a new material. So we're going to go Corona slicer material, click OK. Discard old material, yes. Okay. And what we are going to do is we're going to create a box in top view. Okay. And we are going to move that up. Okay, that's looking good. Applied. Okay, there we go. So over here you can see that you can use boxes with a Corona slicer material on top to cut through things and create sections. Okay, so that is the Corona slicer material. So if you have a house, for example, you can cut off the roof and the walls and just see a plan of the house. Okay, it's quite a cool feature. All right, and then we have our last material, which is the Corona volume material. If you look in my channel, I have a whole video showing you how to use this material. This is usually used to add fog and light rays into your scene and stuff like that. So yeah, one last thing that I would like to just show you is because I think we actually missed the opacity. Yeah, this opacity setting over here. So I just want to go back and create a plane. Okay, so we're just going to create a basic plane. Okay, and we're going to apply this material on top of this plane. Okay, that is looking pretty good. And now if we add a opacity map on top of that, so what we are going to do is we are just going to go over here and we are going to go to bitmap, and we are going to go to this part over here and say, for example, this one. So everything that is white is going to stay visible and everything that is black is going to become transparent. So we're going to apply that on top, and I'm going to just change the color so it's a little bit more visible. You can actually make this a copper. Okay. now it's applied to the background as well. So we'll just change the background to something else. Okay. So now you can see this is how you can create things that are cut out. So this is good for like balustrades and certain elements on buildings and stuff like that. So, and usually this you would need to use a flat plane because it doesn't really work on boxes. But when you UVW map it, you would usually use the planar mapping. Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of this lesson. I think everybody can take a break, and hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it and you learned something, please show your support for the channel by subscribing and liking the video. And I'll see you in the next lesson. Have a good day and keep well. Cheers, bye.